everybody, and thank you very much for hosting me here today. I look forward to showing my slides. I really enjoyed Johnny's talk as well as the talk before, and I think in some ways it's a good setup for what I'm going to do now. He kind of gave you the poetry of the kind of changes that are taking place within the energy sector, and I'm going to give you a little bit of the prose and some of the data that we've collected. My firm is called Bloomberg New Energy Finance. We are an energy market research firm. I'm based in Washington. I head our group that's in the Americas. This is where our teams are around the world, including 5 people that we have in Sao Paulo. So I'm going to make some basic points today and try and get through it all in 15 minutes. And I'm glad to see that the clock hasn't started, so that's good. That means I guess I get some extra time. I'm going to make the following points, and I'm going to try to illustrate them with data to back it up, because I think one of the important things in the discussion around clean energy is what are the facts now, what are the costs, what's the reality of where we are and where we're going. So some basic points that I'm going to make. One, it's clean energy, it's not alternative energy. And I'll tell you why that the word alternative is now a misnomer. 2, renewables are now the lowest cost option for generating power in a number of parts of the world today, not in the future, but today. 3, Chile is a global and regional leader in clean energy for a variety of reasons, including policies. 4, that electric vehicles are poised to make a major breakthrough, and I'll try to build off of some of the things that Johnny talked about just a few moments ago. 5, we think that renewables as a power source will grow very quickly over the next 25 years based on really mainly just the technological innovations that are taking place. And that's great news. But we do not think that they will grow fast enough under the current scenarios to really address the threat of climate change. And thus, more will need to be done over the next 25 years. So I'll try and illustrate each one of these points in succession as I go here. First of all, as luck would have it, today was the day that we as a firm released our global numbers for the amount of money that has gotten invested in clean energy around the world. This is a brand new figure as of today. We said in 2016, $287 billion in new money flowed into the clean energy industry around the world. That's a lot of capital. And it's worth noting that to my basic point, which is that the majority of activity that's now taking place when it comes to building new power projects is in renewables, in terms of the majority of money that's being deployed and the number of gigawatts that's actually getting built. So there's nothing alternative about clean energy if it's accounting for the majority of activity that is taking place around the world. Second, the costs of clean energy have fallen very dramatically over the last, really 25 years, but in particular over the last 5 years. The chart at the left shows the decline that we've seen in the cost of wind turbines. The chart at the right shows the very sharp decline that we've seen in solar panel prices. Really, just even in the last 9 or 10 years, we've seen an 80 or higher % drop in the cost of a solar module or solar panel. And of course that means all kinds of new opportunities are arising for distributed solar, as Ignacio was talking about earlier, and all different types of scenarios. In terms of where Latin America fits into that larger picture, again, recall that I just said there was $290 billion globally invested in this sector. A fairly small slice of about $12 billion was invested in Latin American countries. And this is just a quick look at which ones that we've seen. Unfortunately, last year was actually not a spectacular year for new investment in clean energy in Latin America, but there are a variety of reasons that are not all bad for why this is taking place. And if you look at the different countries, you roll the clock back, it used to be that the vast majority of the activity was always taking place in Brazil, which obviously is the largest economy in Latin America. But over time, more countries have gotten involved. And of course, you see the number for Chile in 2015. We counted $4 billion of new investment in 2015. That dropped in 2016, but partially because there are a lot of projects that are under development right now that are going to get financing, we think, in the next year or two. One other point on Chile, a big project that we produce annually is called Climate Scope. It's at www.global-climatescope.org. It's a project that we do looking at all the countries of about 58 countries around the world and ranking them for how welcoming an environment they create for clean energy investment. And Chile finished number 2 in the world. Number 1 was China, and a lot of people are surprised by that because China also is a major emitter of CO2 and has built a lot of coal plants. But to be clear, China is also the biggest player at building new wind and solar capacity and building the equipment to do that. But Chile itself has set long-term targets for adding renewable capacity. Chile has also been by far the market leader for solar within Latin America in terms of the vast majority of new solar that's been built across Latin America has happened in Chile. Part of it is because solar's gotten cheaper, and that's wonderful. Part of it is because you have an extraordinary solar resource in this country. But part of it also is because of policies. And then finally, part of it is you have big companies that want to buy power, and they want to buy it directly from the source. And so if you have a big if you have a big server farm and you're a company like Google or others, you might want to pair up with a solar plant nearby and just buy the power directly. The same is true of the mining industry in the Atacama who are interested in buying solar-generated power to power their operations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about electric vehicles for just a moment and build a little bit off of what Johnny was talking about just a moment ago. So far, our estimate for 2016 was that we will have seen something like 600,000 electric vehicles sold around the world, which is a relatively impressive number, although it's worth putting that in context. In the United States, in 2015, we sold 17 million cars. So 600,000 globally for electric vehicles versus 17 million just in the US. It's still a very small percentage of the total cars being sold. But we think that's going to change, and let me talk a little bit about why. The other thing I would note is that electric vehicles, certainly as Johnny was noting, have certain advantages over internal combustion engine vehicles in terms of less parts and less service. And in addition, we have seen that consumers, when presented with the right kind of vehicle that's an electric vehicle, are interested. So, for instance, the Tesla 3 is the next model of Tesla. It's due out in about a year. Tesla, when they announced the new car, which is going to be in the range of $30,000 to $40,000 and much more affordable than other cars that they've produced so far, took deposits from customers who are interested in buying the car. And so, within the first several days, there were over 300,000 people who said they wanted to buy this car. I don't even know what the final number is, but those were the early day numbers. That means they were pledging to spend about $12 billion on buying these vehicles. That's a lot of money. And put that in some kind of context, this is how much the iPhone 6 sold in its initial days, which was about $3.5 billion. This is how much Star Wars grossed at the box office during its opening weekend. So this is a legitimate blockbuster for sure in the grand context of things. And it shows that consumers do want to buy electric vehicles, and there are real opportunities there. But of course, the issue around electric vehicles, beyond the excitement and the hype and the fact that, frankly, I think in many ways they're superior products, other than the fact that they often can't go as far as combustion engine cars, the knock against electric vehicles in many cases is that for many consumers, economically, they don't make sense right now. And one of the main reasons for that is because the batteries inside them are too expensive. The typical cost of an electric vehicle, about a third or more of the total car cost, is just the battery. So obviously, making electric vehicles more appealing to consumers is about driving down those costs of the battery. Now, the good news is that's happening. This is just a quick look at our tracking of the price of lithium-ion batteries. These are the batteries that are being built at the Tesla Gigafactory and other places. And the price at which these have been coming down has been much faster than, frankly, we had expected. You can see it was at approximately $1,000 per kilowatt hour. It is down as low as $300 per kilowatt hour. We've even heard lower. But it has to go lower for most consumers around the world to want to make an economically driven decision to buy an electric vehicle. Our view is that that'll probably happen sometime in the mid-2020s. but it could happen sooner. And there are a number of new cars that are coming, and Volkswagen and other automakers are very motivated to get ahead of this, so it could very well happen sooner. But these are our forecasts. Thinking longer term, our forecast, if you see on the far right side of this chart, shows that we think that about 1 in 3 cars that will be sold in 2040 will be an electric vehicle. We think there will be an adoption rate once the costs come down and once consumers become more familiar with how much better a product these can be. There are different scenarios, of course, to think about. If the oil price stays low, or goes down, I should say, from approximately $50 or $60 a barrel to $20 a barrel, then obviously for many consumers, they'll be less interested in buying an electric vehicle. One other scenario, which we certainly are interested in, is what we call a shared vehicle scenario, which is that more and more young people don't buy cars at all, but use things like Uber and other ride-sharing services. And basically, those types of cars we've seen in the United States and elsewhere are very often electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. So the more of those that get on the road, the more overall electric vehicle sales we think that we'll see. I should note that this is a forecast that we made, I think, 18 months ago. It is far more ambitious, certainly, than the ones you'll see from BP or Exxon or the International Energy Agency. But the reality is that anybody who predicts for you that there will not be a growth in electric vehicles is also making a really risky prediction, because the world changes. And we've seen that in the energy industry, and we're seeing that in the transportation industry now. There will be a lot of change over the next 25 years, for sure. And one last note is that I would say that this type of long-term thinking has become more integrated into some parts of the automotive industry. So the other day, the CEO of Nissan, one of the world's largest automakers, got up at Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, and he basically showed our numbers. And he said, we think that about a third of the world will be buying electric cars by 2040. All right, so I'm going to finish on a happy and a sad note here. So on the positive side of things, the trajectory and the progress that we've seen for clean energy, we think will continue. And we've seen a lot of it, but we think we're going to see more. So we think over the next 25 years, the costs of, for instance, just to show one example, of solar will continue to decline really at actually a slower rate than we've seen to date. That's our forecast. We think that you'll go from about $100 per megawatt hour as a levelized cost for solar in a number of countries down to somewhere below 50 over the next 25 years. And that, plus wind costs coming down, plus battery costs coming down, gets you to a world that starts to look like this. On the left-hand side, you see about 6,500 gigawatts of capacity of installed power around the world today. On the right-hand side is our forecast, which is that we think about a doubling of that will take place over the next 25 years. The yellow you see and all throughout these charts is solar. The light blue is wind. And so you can see that right now, today, wind and solar represent a relatively modest 11% of the total capacity around the world as of the end of 2015. We think that will grow to 42% by 2040. But in reality, let's be clear, there'll still be a lot of fossil generation that will still be out there. But if you look in the middle, which is the amount of stuff that gets built over the next 25 years, again, you see a lot of yellow in particular and a lot of blue. And we think in part the yellow is due to the fact that we think equipment costs have already come down, will keep going down, and making solar and solar more viable in a variety of different ways. And of course, one of the first ways we think about is, a big field full of these things powering into the grid, but it's going to happen in a lot more interesting ways than that as well, whether it's a little solar lantern that goes to a tiny village in sub-Saharan Africa and provides light for the first time for a home, whether it's a mini grid that provides electricity to a small, far-flung community. There are 1.3 billion people who have no legitimate access to energy today, and solar really can help solve that problem. I'm very optimistic about that. So that's the positive view, and it's a much more positive view, frankly, than you'll see from some of the other international forecasting agencies, the International Energy Agency, ExxonMobil, the Energy Information Administration. And it's our view, and it's certainly more positive, and it's based on our experience of watching this industry. But my last point, which I want to make, is even in that positive and virtuous world of more renewables being built, we don't see that solving the climate problem. So the top gray line shows what we forecast to be CO2 emissions from the power sector over the next 25 years. Basically, it more or less stays flat on a year-on-year basis, even with all that additional renewables getting built. The problem is, it's not just that we're going to add more renewables, we're going to add more fossil generation, and we're going to grow because of India and China and other countries, and of course Chile. All these countries are going to grow. The green line shows the trajectory of CO2 emissions that we would need to get onto in order to address the climate crisis. And this is based on the UNFCCC's prediction of what it would take to get to to limit the temperature rise to only 2 degrees. That's a big gap. And the reality is, while it's wonderful to think that technology will solve all of our problems and will simply just kind of have all this stuff happen and it will save the world, it won't. More needs to be done to encourage more clean energy development, energy efficiency, and to reduce fossil fuel generation. So I want to leave you on an optimistic note, which is that the progress we've seen has been fantastic, and we think much, much more will be done in the future. But it will not be sufficient, and more policy help beyond the Paris Agreement, beyond everything else, will be needed if we want to effectively address climate change. Thank you.